I have a question. Is there an immortal soul that after death will either ascend into heaven or descend into hell? An op-ed sent to the Los Angeles Times asks the question, how Christians came to believe in heaven, hell, and the immortal soul. Dr. Bart Ehrman says that billions of Christians around the world believe that on Easter, Jesus was raised from the dead and taken up to heaven to live with God. They also believe that when they die, their own souls will go to heaven. The great irony is that this is not at all what Jesus himself believed. There's an old story that's passed around through the years that the University of Chicago Divinity School each year would have what is called Baptist Day. It was a day when all the Baptists in the area were invited to the school. And on this day, each person would bring a sack lunch to be eaten outdoors in a grassy picnic area. Every Baptist Day, the school would invite one of the greatest minds to lecture in the Theological Education Center. One year, they invited Dr. Paul Tillich, who spoke for 2.5 hours, proving that the resurrection of Jesus was false. He quoted scholar after scholar and book after book. He concluded that since there was no such thing as the historical resurrection, the religious tradition of the church was groundless, emotional mumbo-jumbo, because it was based on a relationship with a risen Jesus who, in fact, never rose from the dead in any literal sense. He then asked if there were any questions. After about 30 seconds, an old dark-skinned preacher with a head of short-cropped, woolly white hair stood up in the back of the auditorium. "Dr. Tillich, I have one question," he said as all eyes turned towards him. He reached into his sack lunch and he pulled out an apple and began to eat it. "Dr. Tillich, my question's a simple question. I haven't read those books you referred to, and I can't recite the scriptures in the original Greek, but I do believe my Bible is true." He finished the apple. "All I want to know is, this apple I just ate, was it bitter or was it sweet?" Dr. Tillich paused for a moment and answered in an exemplary scholarly fashion, "I can't possibly understand that question, for I haven't tasted your apple." The white-haired preacher dropped the core of his apple into his crumpled paper bag, looked up at Dr. Tillich and said calmly, "Neither of you tasted my Jesus." The auditorium erupted with applause and cheers. Dr. Tillich, he thanked his audience and promptly left the platform. I don't know who wrote this story, but it brings up a valid point. You see, in this op-ed to the Los Angeles Times, Mr. Ehrman, who was a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill at the time, wrote how Christians came to believe in heaven, hell, and the immortal soul. And in this article, he iterates his opinion as to how first-century Christians came to believe in the soul, even though Jesus himself never believed in one. In fact, he writes that when we die, we simply don't exist anymore. For that matter, neither Jesus or God will even remember who we were. Hey, I'm Daniel Lee, your host of the Divine Muse. And in this video, we're going to take a look at what the Bible has to say about this subject. So, buckle in, because this one is going to be a wild ride. So did Jesus believe that the soul would go to heaven or hell? Mr. Ehrman says Jesus didn't think a person's soul would live on after death, either to experience bliss in the presence of God above or to be tormented in the fires of hell below. As a Jew of the first century, Jesus didn't think the soul went anywhere after death. It simply ceased to exist. He went on to say that most Christians today view the soul as an immaterial essence inside the physical frame of the body. Once the body dies, the soul lives on, intact forever. That is the view handed down to us not from the Bible, but from ancient Greek thinking known best from the writings of Plato. We got our faith from Plato. Imagine that. The Bible portrays the human as a creation of God that is one unified entity, an animated body. The soul does not exist once the body dies. When God created Adam, he gathered dust from the ground and made it alive by breathing into it breath of life. This breath did not exist as an independent entity, or the soul, outside the body. It was simply what made the body alive. That's why the Old Testament, we are told that at death, or in the grave, or the pit, or shallow, all used as synonyms, by the way, no one can worship God and God no longer remembers them. Once the breath, soul, left the body, the person did not and would not exist anymore. I think there are three main points that this article is centered around. Let me address these statements, and I think the answer, did Jesus actually believe that there was a soul? I think it'll be quite evident. First off, Mr. Ehrman says Jesus did not think a person's soul would live on after death. However, in Luke chapter 23, verses 39 through 43, we find the story of the thief nailed to the cross next to Jesus. Listen to what Jesus says to the thief. Then one of the criminals hanging there began to yell insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us!" But the other answered, rebuking him, "Don't you even fear God, since you are undergoing the same punishment? We're punished justly because we're getting back what we deserve for the things that we did. But this man's done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise." Did you hear it? Today. When we pass from this life, you will be with me. To further drive this point home, Paul says, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. So we are always confident, knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are confident, yes, well pleased rather, to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. That is, when we die, we're present with God, present with the Lord. See, the whole point of the gospel is that death no longer has a hold on us. If Jesus didn't believe that there was an eternal life, then why would he have taken the cross in our place? The wages of our sin was a debt that we couldn't pay. However, if there's no life after death and subsequently no condemnation for our sins, then what wage is there to be paid? Moreover, why would Jesus allow himself to be crucified at Calvary? In the words of C.S. Lewis from his book Mere Christianity, he said, either this man, referring to Jesus, was and is the Son of God, or else he's a madman, or something worse. Mr. Ehrman went on to say that after death, no one can worship God, and God no longer remembers him. See, once the breath, the soul, has left the body, the person did not and would not exist anymore. With regards to never having existed, the psalmist writes this in Psalm 69 and verse 28. Let them be erased from the book of life. He's referring to the wicked who walk the earth. John, when writing his Revelation, further builds upon this point. He says in Revelation 20 and 12, I also saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by what was written in the books. I don't know. To me, it seems from even just this one passage that not only do the dead not cease to exist, but the fact that they're written in the Lamb's Book of Life, or the Book of Life, they're remembered as well. Mr. Ehrman would then go on to say that the Jews didn't believe in an immortal soul. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 5, we find this verse. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength. There were three things there. Did you notice that? Heart, soul, and strength? Job in chapter 33 and verse 18 said, God spares his soul from the pit, his life from crossing the river of death. Two different, completely independent things. The psalmist writes, chapter 62, verses 5 and 6, rest in God alone, my soul. For my hope comes from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation. Now, I've tried to kind of point out that the two are separate, but I guess one could argue that the psalmist is referring to his heart and not an actual soul. He's talking about his feelings. So, take a look at this verse. Jeremiah chapter 4 and verse 19 says this, my anguish, I write in agony. Oh, the pain in my heart pounds, and I cannot be silent for you, my soul. Do you see the two? My heart, my soul. For you, my soul, have heard the sound of the ram's horn, the shout of battle. Here we see the heart and the soul are two independent things and not just a metaphor for the other. It isn't without some irony that each of these writers were speaking from a time before Christ, Old Testament saints. Subsequently, except for Job, who's believed to have written his book prior to the birth of Abraham, these writers are considered Jewish. In Matthew chapter 10 and verse 28, don't fear those who kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul. Body, soul. Rather, fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. So I guess it's pretty clear cut that the early Jews actually believed that there was an immortal soul, and the fact that Jesus believed there was a soul and there was hell. See, those were the words of Jesus himself. Did Jesus believe there was a physical hell? Yes. And he also believed there was a heaven. And those who placed their trust in him would be spared the judgment of their sins. Let me just say, I appreciate Mr. Ehrman's opinion and the courage it takes to put yourself out there. And if I butchered your last name, should you ever watch this, I do sincerely apologize. But with that said, as you can see when we address these 3 points, the whole article just falls apart. In my opinion, Mr. Ehrman, I don't think you've ever tasted my Jesus. Still, my opinion is just that. It's my opinion. So don't just take my word for it. Study this out for yourself. And if you disagree or you have a different take on my perspective, feel free to leave me a comment below. After all, we're told to study to show ourselves approved unto God. If you like this video, please consider sharing it with someone, and don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. All the articles that I've referenced, you'll find them down below in the comments. Also, I want to give a special thank you to the Protest for allowing me to use their song, Noise Revolution. You can find their music anywhere you grab your digital media. Just look for the Legacy album. Again, that's the Protest, Noise Revolution from their album, Legacy. Or you can also click on the link below and you can see the song in its entirety. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Daniel Lee, and you've been watching The Divine Muse. God bless you. However, in Luke chapter 23 and verse 39, through, try it again. Blah, 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 blah. The auditorium erupted with applause and cheers, and Dr. Tillage thanked his audience and promptly blah, blah, blah. Try that one again. Hey, Daniel, my editor, just cut that out. That doesn't even pertain to this, so I don't even want to see that right now, okay? All right, thanks. We are the Noise Revolution.